boldly engaging the mindless propaganda of our time, apparently with reason. This is Rage of the Age.
This is Rage of the Age, and we have with us the Director of Training for Reflex Protect, who has also developed a Survive a Shooting course at surviveashooting.com, writing a book, Survive a Shooting, Life-Saving Tactics and Strategies to Survive Active Shooters and Other Terrorist Attacks. He is a former U.S. paratrooper from the 82nd Airborne, was also a U.S. sniper and sniper instructor. He's a 5th degree black belt instructor. I want to introduce to you today, Alain Burrese. Alain, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on, Philip. It's a pleasure.
With all of your experience with the military and other training, and to add to that, you also are a licensed lawyer for the state of Montana. Was this always your dream to put together some kind of course or a book about how to defend against mass shootings and terrorist attacks, things like that, or just kind of something you thought I need to do this later on in life?
It's something I thought I needed to do. I've always been a martial artist and into self-defense from a young kid in the 70s and formal training in the 80s and through the Army. And so I've been teaching Hapkido and safety and self-defense classes since the 90s. However, it was after the Aurora shooting, if you remember at the premiere of the Batman movie, people started asking me, because I was known for teaching self-defense and safety, what do we do in these situations? And at the time, I knew the run, hide, fight from the government, and I thought, I want to do more in this and help people. And that's when I started studying. I became certified by Safariland Training to teach their active shooter response course. I was on a team of instructors that taught thousands of people throughout Montana. And then I started getting contacted by people outside of Montana. And I said, well, I can't bring the team, but here's what I can do. And I developed my own course. And then I wrote the book, Survive a Shooting, which is the book I wanted when I started into this path, because I wanted a very authoritative, complete book on the topic. And then when Reflex Protect was born, the director or the CEO of that company said, Alain, I like what you're doing with this active shooter stuff. Do you want to join forces and we can do active shooter and Reflex Protect and help even more people? And that's why I joined that company a year ago, 18 months ago, and started teaching active shooter and Reflex Protect courses from that platform as well.
Now, Reflex Protect, what exactly do they do?
It is a company that provides training and a defensive, less lethal product. It's a brand new defensive spray that does not contaminate like pepper spray. It actually works a little faster than pepper spray.
Okay.
And we have the best decontaminant on the market. We went to chemists and had a purposeful decontaminant made, which was essential for hospitals because they have a huge workplace violence problem. It gave nurses and frontline people a means to defend themselves, but then a way to clean up and help that person when the situation was resolved. And it turns out that's exactly what law enforcement is wanting right now. Our law enforcement sales have picked up. We're developing Reflex Protect Tactical specifically for the law enforcement section because it gives them a means to put a subject down and then nobody else is contaminated, no other officers or whatever. I mean, they can spray a guy that's in the back seat of this patrol car if they have to, and they're going to be fine in the front seat. And then with our decontaminant, they can help the guy, have him back to no pain and restrained, and it's completely over. And so it's just it's a more humane way, which in today's climate is being well received by law enforcement and those that are in control of law enforcement, admin, liking that they have that better, less lethal tool that they can also reverse quickly when the situation is resolved.
That's a very neat application because I know, like with pepper spray and other things, there's no undoing the effect other than time and just enduring. And it's this one. So you're saying I can turn on or off at will with the subject.
Usually it's 2 to 3 minutes and the subject is feeling okay. And 5 to 10 minutes, they're like almost like nothing happened.
Wow.
And every law enforcement officer that's tried it says, wow, I didn't believe that it would reverse that fast. They're more impressed with the decontaminant than the spray. And,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah,
were
I
in
have
the
to.
you
Go
were in
ahead.
the military, so you remember the CS gas chamber.
Yes. Yes.
The active ingredient in our product is CS, but it's
Oh,
concentrated in a gel formula, so it doesn't go everywhere. It goes just directly on the person, and when it gets in
okay.
the eyes, it's instantaneous pain and shutting of the eyes.
Right. Wow. I got to admit that I am now more impressed with the decontaminant than the spray itself to eliminate the effects like that. It's a good tool to have. Now, you were telling me that you have a special 10% code for those listening to this if they're interested in getting this product from Reflex Protect. Why don't you share that with us?
Sure, they can go to reflexprotect.com and they can enter my first name, ALAIN, and they can get a discount on their purchase there on the larger size or the little pocket size that, a lot of people like to carry for personal protection.
Now, I look at your the layout of your book. Like you said, this is the book you wanted when things were happening, and I look at it; it's pretty thorough. I mean, you have like 11 chapters. You got numerous appendixes to deal with different situations. I like how you just incorporate different aspects: the legal aspect, the before aspect, during, after, everything, anything you can think of. It's like you said, I'm going to figure this out and put this in this book. Um, so let's start with first the before portion, defining the problems. I mean, you even give a history of mass killing. So, I mean, the problems defined, how to prevent it. What are some of the prevention methods that we can employ?
I think one important thing that institutions can have is a risk assessment team. And that could be one person for a small organization to many people, the head of security, different admin people, the mental health worker, the law enforcement officer that's agreed to be on this team. And it's not that the team has to meet and have meetings. We don't need more
Right.
meetings.
No, we don't.
But if a potential threat is reported, that's when this group of individuals will assess that threat and determine what actions need to be taken, whether that's mental health assistance, whether that's law enforcement intervention, whatever it is, they can do that. And when you have that team formed, you have to have reporting channels, including an anonymous reporting channel. So people that recognize potential signs, which I have a bunch in the book, I teach in the live classes, if they recognize some of these signs, they can report that. The assessment team takes it serious, and they do their due diligence to determine if this threat is legit and what next steps need to be taken. And that has stopped many incidents from ever occurring.
Wow. Can you give us some examples of some of those signs?
Sure. And these come, from FBI that probably has the largest database that, that we can trust of,
Right.
Looking at prior incidents and compiling the statistics. But things like, something traumatic happened in a person's life. That could be a divorce, a breakup, a death, a firing. And then the individual's more secluded, and all of a sudden they're buying firearms unusually. I mean, I'm in Montana, going out and buying a new gun for hunting season or for target practice or whatever is no big deal.
Right.
But we know when it just doesn't seem right.
Yes.
The person's out there at a firing range practicing shooting under desks. The guy that was the Virginia Tech killer, there was interviews later that when he was on the firing range, he was walking and shooting like he was practicing shooting under tables and desks. That's not normal practice for hunting. And so those unusual signs should make you think, what's going on? A fascination with previous killers. We know that some of these killers study and learn from previous killers. Virginia Tech guy, and I don't like to say their names. That's why I'm just saying the Virginia
Yes,
Tech guy.
that's fine.
He chained the doors to keep the law enforcement out. They figure he learned that from the Amish school killing, because remember that guy barricaded the cops out when he was doing terrible things to those Amish girls and such inside. So they study, and so that fascination and studying of previous killers, the fascination and study of explosives and improvised explosives and those kind of things. So you put a few of those together, and you might be going, "What's up? What's up with this guy?"
Right. So if we think we're seeing these type of signs, do we go straight to law enforcement? Do we call the FBI? What's the course to take?
It would depend. If it's your neighbor or a family member. If you remember a couple years ago, that gentleman reported his daughter when he found the diary where she wanted, and he went to law enforcement, and hopefully they got that young lady the help she needed, and they definitely prevented something terrible from happening.
Sure.
If your workplace has a means to report and that threat assessment team, that would be a channel to use. So it really depends. If workplace, I would use the proper channels if they have them. If not, law enforcement, would be the first step.
So when it comes to the actual then event itself, if we get to that point, you've mentioned the run, hide, fight. You call it a mantra. It's just repeated over and over. Do you not like that description, that method, or are you think it needs tweak, or you just don't like it, period?
I like it in the fact that it gets people thinking about options. I preferred a different terminology, and I didn't like it taught in the linear fashion that it's often taught. It's often you hear people say, first you run. If you can't run, then you hide. And only then, if you can't do either of those, should you fight. And it's not necessarily going to be a linear thought process. And that's why in my book and in the Reflex Protect courses, we use a triangle. The beginning of the middle of the triangle, you have to take action. You have to move. You have to do something. What you do won't be linear. It will be going toward one of the points of the triangle determined on where the killer is, the proximity of the killer to you, your location and environment. An easy example is if I'm sitting at the front of a classroom, say a college class, I'm sitting in the front of the classroom, and all of a sudden that killer breaks through the door, you're not going to run. You're not going to hide. Your option right there is for those people closest to him to tackle him and pound his head and take the gun away. And that has worked in situations. And so now if you're in the class, if you're way, way down the hall, escaping, that's an option. If you're in a different place, maybe locking down. And I like the word escape better than run, just because I want you out of the kill zone. It might mean running. It might mean dropping to the ground and crawling. It might mean going out a window. I like the word deny better than hide, because hiding and hoping isn't really a plan for survival.
No.
I'd rather be proactive, and I'm going to deny that killer the means to kill me. And that could be by locking him out and barricading. It could be by getting behind cover, something that's bulletproof. So I want to deny him that access. It could be hiding. If he can't see you, there's a chance he won't shoot. But I want it to be proactive, that you're doing something to keep that killer. And then I like, attack back when I'm talking about defending yourself, because you are going to have to stop him. And that might be with a fire extinguisher. It might be with Reflex Protect. It might be with your bare hands, if that's all you have.
Right. I think you highlight maybe part of the tension in our nation at large, perhaps. There's different mentalities when it comes to defending yourself. Some see it as just get away at all costs and put up no resistance. Whereas there's a side that says, why can't you just resist and end the threat right away? And it's almost like those two refuse to get along with each other. But in your triangle, it's condition based, right? There's times where you have to fight, and there's times where if you can get away, get away. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Certainly escaping and getting to safety without ever having to go hands-on or get physical with another person is ideal, but the world's not ideal. There are times where your only option is to attack back and stop that person, or let that person have his way with you. And that's, to me, isn't an option.
I'm willing to bet, in having watched numerous journalistic coverings of these mass shootings, and people ask what can be done, that's almost never come up to actually engage, unless it's someone who's advocating gun rights, and then that immediately gets a negative response. That's the only ones who seem to say, take it to the shooter as an option. All the other options seem just flee and escape and hope they don't get you. And it's like, you've removed, I don't know. I don't understand why the idea that you may actually defend yourself is immediately removed from a lot of the discussion. Is it a litigation base, maybe? What do you think?
I just think a lot of people in our society, unfortunately, are so adverse to physical violence or so scared of it that they don't want to think that way. It was funny because, you mentioned people say, well, there's nothing we can do. There was an interview after the Maryland shooting a couple years ago where people were actually hiding under desks, listening to the guy reload, which, in my book, I talk about a firearm malfunction or reloading or those kind of incidents where he's not shooting. And that gives you a window of opportunity to do something, not just stay in your hiding listening to him.
Right.
But also there was a person that on the interview, it's telling the reporter, well, there's absolutely nothing you can do about these situations. Well, we've just talked about stuff you can do. I wrote a whole book about things you could. I mean, there are things we can do before, during, and after. And one of the greatest things that I have seen with people that have taken the courses, the live courses, is the light switch being turned on that they can do something.
Yes.
And that fighting back, whether it's, using a non-lethal or a lethal weapon, giving them that permission that they can fight back and stop that person to protect themselves and others is empowering.
Yes.
And especially if you give them a means to do it. And that's one of the reasons I joined Reflex Protect, because it gives a less lethal means to those people that are in jobs, like a teacher in a school, a nurse in a hospital, or just anybody that doesn't want to use lethal force. And that's a choice of individuals. It gives them a way to fight back where they actually have a means to stop somebody. And in actuality, Reflex Protect has actually been used against people that are violent, that aren't killers. Could it be used against a killer? Yes. And you're going to ambush them with it. You're going to have that door locked, but you're going to be ready at the ambush position if they come in. The same place I teach to have a fire extinguisher ready, you can have Reflex Protect ready there too, as a last means to defend yourself.
Right.
But it's empowering to people, and that makes me feel good when people feel better and are less afraid. Because the reality is, the situations, even though they've increased throughout the years, they're still rare. But people are afraid of them because there's the sensationalism of the media, and there's that fear. And if we can go in and eliminate some of that fear and empower people, that's the key right there.
Empowering people, that's a very strong statement. It's almost like we have removed power from the average citizen to take action for good things rather than just hide and hope for the best. On your webpage, you Survive a Shooting, you talk about your book as it's not just something that just tells people something. You actually give information and guidance on how to do it. So you have and you've gave some examples. You have very specific step-by-step things you can do to be prepared in these circumstances, right?
Exactly. And, there's instructions in there of how to use a fire extinguisher. And I've seen websites and active shooter people teaching fire extinguishers, and I don't like how they're teaching it, because they're teaching to take the hose off and use it like you would put out a fire. I teach to keep the hose strapped to the canister. And, you'll see pictures and actually videos there's a bunch of free videos that go with the book. And the book has the URL, and you can sign up, get those videos. I teach how to do that, where after you spray the guy, you smash him in the head with the can. And the way I teach it allows even a smaller person to keep control of that fire extinguisher. If you swing it wildly, they're too heavy to control. But the way I teach, people can actually use them and defend themselves with them if they have to.
That's a neat idea, though, because I'm pretty certain most people would not have thought, hey, use the fire extinguisher as a defense mechanism.
They don't. And that wakes up a lot of people. Wow, I wouldn't have thought of that. But fire extinguishers are in every public building.
Yeah.
And nobody's going to get, there's a huge arm the teacher debate. And when I wrote the book, a Reflex Protect wasn't around. And so fire extinguisher was the best thing I could say to put in a classroom and give somebody a means to defend themselves. Now schools are putting Reflex Protect and fire extinguishers. So they got the best of both worlds there.
Okay, so this Reflex Protect, is it are you saying it's located in public areas, or they give this to all the teachers directly?
We have schools where they give a can to every teacher. All the teachers go through the training, and then it's usually the principal or superintendent says, once you've gone through the training, it's the teacher's option. If you want it in your classroom, we'll put a can in the classroom.
Okay.
And almost unanimously, the teachers usually have it in their classroom. We've had some teachers, for whatever religious reasons or personal reasons, refuse it, but most people want it.
Well, that's good. And I'm not against having that choice to use it, but I'm definitely for the choice of wanting to have it just the same. Do you have instances where it's actually been employed in schools and it's been for the better?
We don't have any in schools yet. We're a pretty new company, and so last year was the first year we were going into schools, and now schools were shut down.
Right.
We do have uses where it's been used in hospitals, and we have uses in private individuals and in law enforcement.
I hope you're enjoying today's episode. If you really like Rage of the Age, we will encourage you to leave a review on the platform that you're listening to, but especially if you would like a copy of my book, Not in the Wind, Earthquake, or Fire, which is a first-hand account of my second deployment to Iraq, and it's filled with many spiritual insights. I'm going to give away 10 copies for free, and every week I will give out a copy for someone who leaves a review of this podcast. You can do that by going to Twitter, write your review, and then hashtag it Rage of the Age Now. Or you can go to Facebook, find our page, Rage of the Age, click the reviews, recommend us, and then write in your review. I hope next week to give away a copy of Not in the Wind, Earthquake, or Fire to someone who leaves a review.
You're listening to Rage of the Age. Rage of the Age. Politics, religion, economics, and history with a conservative bend.
I think an important aspect you talk about in your book as well is when the law enforcement arrives. So I'm sure that changes the whole dynamic. There's just you and the shooter at first. Well, you and everybody else and the shooter. But at some point, the police are going to come on the stage, and therefore the things you do have to be sort of more tailored towards them as well, because they have guns too, right? You want to talk us through that a little bit?
Certainly. What you don't want to be is an innocent victim.
Right.
And the law enforcement don't want that, and you certainly don't want that. And so when law enforcement arrives, one of the key things is I don't want you holding a firearm or waving a firearm around. And that could be your personal firearm if you carry and you use that to stop a threat, or if you stop the killer and took his firearm. Wherever the firearm came from, I don't want you holding it when law enforcement show up, because they don't know the difference. And so one of the things I teach, let's say I'm in a classroom and the killer came through the door and we were stacked at the doorway, right beside the doorway, the best place to attack back if you have to. And we tackle the guy, and two of my coworkers are holding him down, and I took the gun. I'm going to go a few feet away across the room. I want to set that gun on a table or a desk. And if I have to, I could pick it up and use it. Say that killer overpowered my coworkers and got loose. and I needed to grab that firearm and use it to defend us, I could. But if the police come in, I'm standing there with nothing in my hands. I take a step away from that gun, hands up, and I say, that's his gun right there. And so they're very clear that I'm not a threat.
Right.
That's the most important thing you can do with law enforcement, is let them see your open hands so they know you are not a threat, and then follow their instructions. And they may treat everybody like criminals as they're coming in because they don't know the difference.
Right.
It's not a time to be insulted. It's not a time to get your feelings hurt because they were rude or whatever. They have a job to do, and they're trying to save lives. And their primary job is to stop that threat to save lives, and without anybody else or themselves getting hurt or killed. And if they're rude when they're doing it, oh well. We can get over that, be a survivor, and follow directions.
Yeah, I can't imagine myself, I'm in that scenario and there's this shooter running around just capping people off left and right. And then the police show up and I'm thinking, well, thank God the police are here. And they say, go over there. I go over there, get down. I'll get down. And I'm not, for me, I'm not thinking, that was just so rude and I'm going to be so mad and I'm going to call my lawyer after this. I'm thinking, man, thank goodness that they're here and they're going to grab this guy. But you do have an appendix in your book about lawsuits against organizations and after active shooter events. Are you talking about that type of thing where somebody's upset about something? Or?
Well, some of the lawsuits actually have been against the organization for not preparing or doing as much that they could. A couple things there were lawsuits for Sandy Hook, a terrible shooting with, It's bad when anybody gets killed, but when little kids get killed, it just hits our hearts worse.
Yes.
Some of the elements of the lawsuit is they had doors that a teacher actually had to go out into the hall and use the key in the keyhole to lock the door, then go back in and pull it shut.
Wow.
You need better. So that's why in the book I talk about better ways to be able to lock down.
Okay.
There was an element in there that he shot the front door was locked, but he shot through the window beside the door to get in. There are laminates. They're ballistic glass or different laminates that can be put on glass to make it resistant to that. So some of the lawsuits have been because of institutions not hardening the target or not having things in place to help prevent these.
You're a licensed lawyer for the state of Montana, so I want to throw some legal stuff at you. And if you're like, I ain't qualified, then don't give me the advice, give me your disclaimer, your legal disclaimer. But what do you think then about the red flag laws? Would that be something that would help curb these mass shootings? Because that's kind of a favorite for some people. Or do you think that's going too far?
And again, I don't want to give legal advice, so we will put that disclaimer
there
out
it
there.
Is. Yes, sir.
It's a really hot topic when you talk about, I am for the responsible use of firearms and the responsible ownership. Unfortunately, a lot of people aren't responsible.
Right.
Now, it is, true that a lot of shooting incidents have happened in gun-free zones. And, gun-free zone, criminals don't abide by any laws anyway. Right. I mean, if, when the people talk about laws, well, why don't we just make a law that you can't kill anybody? That would solve all the problems, right?
Right.
So, but again, I don't think that arming all the teachers and some of that should necessarily be the answer too. Because there's just so many problems with having a gun in all the teachers' hands. I am for having an armed law enforcement officer if you have a student resource officer, but as we saw in Florida, that doesn't always mean it's going to end the problem either.
Right.
So it's just a tricky thing. I think a less lethal option everybody should have because it doesn't come with the liability or the responsibility of a lethal option. Yeah. I think for lethal force options, it comes with a much higher responsibility, liability, and you better have a whole lot of training with it as well.
Right. Well, I definitely like the idea of not necessarily lethal means of self-defense. I think people are more comfortable with it. I don't think I'm for arming every teacher either. In my opinion, some shouldn't even be teaching, much less you put a weapon in their in their hands. But and some are competent, but and you and I probably know this probably more so than others. When you put a weapon in somebody's hands and you put upon them the task of you guys shoot this person down, you're asking something heavy from that individual, and not everyone has the training or the gumption to do it, in my opinion. But they might use, something like Reflex Protect or beanbag gun or something, to employ.
Yeah, it's much easier to pull the trigger on a less lethal than it is using lethal force. Especially, if you go back to schools, those are probably a student of that teacher. Most, school shootings are done by students or former students.
Yeah.
So you're asking a teacher to kill, even if it's justified, a student that they used to care for or maybe still care for.
Right.
Hospital violence. Nurses and other healthcare workers, they go into those fields because they want to take care of people.
Right.
And so asking them to take a life, it goes against everything that their career is about. And so there's a reason some people go in the military, some people go into law enforcement, and some people go into other fields.
Right.
And you can't ask these other fields to turn them into soldiers or to law enforcement.
Yeah. Well, I
some
do
could, but
that,
not all.
Some can, like I said, but because there's so much you got to consider that, we do years of training. Police officers do training, on, when to draw, when not to draw. That when you shoot, what's behind what you're shooting. For example, how do you select your target? You practice selecting your targets, and there's just handing a gun to a teacher, say good luck, is kind of like the stupidest defense plan I can imagine. You're asking for trouble, a lot of trouble.
It is, and that's why we actually had a school here in Montana. Half the school board wanted to arm the teachers, and the other half was no way. And the entire school boards opted for Reflex Protect as the middle ground alternative. Because it was less lethal, and that was the key. And the decontaminant was a huge game changer and part of it too.
Yeah, but then on the same side, I would say I'm not against a teacher having a firearm if they're comfortable when able to use it too. So I'm not against it. It's just these extreme reactions from one side or the other is just ridiculous. It's crazy.
Exactly, and and that's up. There's a school in Wyoming. And, I was talking to the superintendent at a conference in Wyoming that I did the keynote speech on for active shooter response. And he's like, we do have armed teachers, but I can see with this product having a less lethal means is good too. And we had a good conversation about, some people can have that firearm. Some would be better with the less lethal. Right. There are some people that it doesn't matter. They're not going to do anything in that aspect. And so knowing those strengths and weaknesses and pros and cons are important, and having the proper training is extremely important, especially if you're going to go into the lethal realm.
Absolutely. So let me then pick your legal brain with the usual disclaimers, of course. The case in St. Louis where the couple, in my opinion, was defending their home, rightfully so, with their weapons. They didn't even shoot at anybody. Being prosecuted in the way they are, is there really a legal foundation for what's happening there?
I haven't read up on what they're actually the prosecution is doing. You can get the brandishing. Just going out there and brandishing the weapon if they weren't under imminent threat of serious bodily harm or death. And it could be incitement of the problem. I personally don't think they should have went outside with the firearms. They probably, if they were in fear for their life, which would justify the use of lethal force in defense, they probably should have stayed in their home.
Okay.
We have to remember, in most states, you are not allowed to use lethal force to protect property, except under a few conditions. Now, if they would have come inside the property, inside their home, then, that changes the dynamics. But them going outside when, if they were actually in fear for their life, they probably would have been better to stay inside, would have been a better course of action.
Right.
So, I mean, again, without reading what the charges are, because I just, I sort of ignored that after I saw it and thought, that was sort of dumb of them. I understand why they did it probably, but it was dumb. They should have stayed inside. It would have been safer and better. But I'm guessing brandishing a weapon when they weren't under imminent threat of serious bodily harm or death would be one of the possible charges. And then maybe incitement, because taking the firearms out there could incite the crowd into more something. But without knowing a little bit more, I'm not positive exactly what the charges are.
Right. So how does the law determine if someone believes they're under threat or not?
It's the totality of the situation. And so you're going to look at the different elements. And so, does the person have the ability to hurt you or kill you? Do they have the means to hurt you and kill you? And do they have the intent? Intent often is difficult to determine because we can't read people's mind. But if they're coming at you saying, I'm going to kill you, or they're coming at you with a fist, or they're pointing a weapon at you, that sort of helps you determine intent. Right. The means, if they have a weapon, if they're bigger than you, if there's a bunch of them, but then the opportunity. And if they were in their house with their doors locked, there's no opportunity until they actually get into the house.
Yeah.
If I'm on one side of a chain link fence and you have a knife, I can't pull my gun and shoot you because you don't have the opportunity to stab or kill me with that fence between us. Now, if you're on the other side of that fence with a gun, you could shoot through the fence and kill me. I could then possibly be justified to shoot you first if you were trying to kill me through that fence.
Right.
And then we also have to look at, some states have a duty to retreat law. And so if there's a duty to retreat law and you didn't do everything in your means to get out of the situation, you can't have justified self-defense. And that will sometimes change if you have a state that also has a castle doctrine law, which castle doctrine laws will negate that duty to retreat and say you don't have a duty to retreat in your home.
Right.
So those are the things we have to look at as far as to be justified to defend ourselves.
Right. I mean, some of that honestly sounds to me like run, hide, fight mantra. Duty to retreat, but it's your place.
Yeah. And I don't like the duty to retreat laws. Montana doesn't have one. And we actually have a castle doctrine law, which we don't really need because we don't have the duty to retreat.
Right.
But wherever you are, you need to know your state's laws to comply with them if you're ever going to use the affirmative defense of self-defense. And basically that's what self-defense is in a court of law. You are admitting that you hurt or maybe even killed somebody, but you had a justifiable reason to do so.
Right.
And then it's on you to prove those elements, that he had the intent, he had the means, he had the opportunity to hurt me, and that's why I was justified in defending myself.
I'm starting to wonder if states should add to their legal statutes, do they have a knife? Did they have a gun? Did they have, a weapon? Were they threatening? Add to that. Oh, and they brought a mob with them. I think maybe that should be added in the statutes now. I don't know.
Well, that goes part of the totality of the situation, which would be means and opportunity and possibly intent. Because we see, with mobs, often that, people are different when they're in a mob than when they're by themselves.
Oh, yes.
And so that can help with the intent element, but it definitely helps with the means, where you might be okay one-on-one with somebody. If there's a whole bunch of them, unless you're Chuck Norris or Jackie Chan, you're not going to be beating up a whole big group of people.
Yeah. Chuck Norris, how's the joke go? He has to, register himself as a lethal weapon or something, right? If you unleash Chuck Norris, was that too much force?
Exactly.
Absolutely. But you also talk about in your books things like suicide bombers, IEDs, which are improvised explosive devices, terrorist attacks. So you kind of expand this idea. So are these the same principles expanded, or do you like treat those as a separate subject in your book?
They're the same principles expanded, but there's some different things to look for. And one of the most important things I try to stress in the book and in my live courses is people need to pull their head out of their apps, APPS, get off their phones, get off their screens, and pay attention. And pay attention to what's going on around them, and pay attention to how they're affecting things going around them. I mean, suicide bombers, if you suspect something, you see this guy and he's wearing a heavy coat and different things, and he just doesn't look right, get out of the area fast. So you do need to escape that. You're probably not going to attack back and take out a suicide bomber. So your options are limited. You escape the area, or you deny the access of the explosion by getting something that would stop that between you and them. But your best bet is farther away from the explosion you are, the safer you're going to be. And don't run to the parking lot, because what these terrorists have done, especially in other countries, is you have a car bomb out in the parking lot. And so when something blows up in the stadium or the arena, wherever they are, everybody runs to the parking area, and you got secondary explosive devices out there. And so you always have to be on the lookout for these secondary threats.
Alan, it looks like this is a really good book. I definitely recommend it for those who are listening. If somebody wanted to find this, where can they find your book, Survive a Shooting, at?
They can get autographed copies at surviveashooting.com. It's also available on Amazon, especially for those that are outside the U.S., because shipping that cost a fortune. When I ship, some people are willing to pay for it to get that autographed copy.
Right.
And it's also on Kindle. A lot of people like the Kindle version. That's much easier to carry around. So it's on Amazon Kindle as well.
Well, Alan, it's been a real pleasure talking to you today about your book and about this topic. It was good to have you today.
It's my pleasure. I really appreciate you having me on, Philip.
I want to take a quick opportunity to give a shout out to two podcasts that I want to recommend that you listen to. The first one, of course, is the Gary Wilkerson podcast, which is the podcast of the guest that you're listening to today for today's program. The Gary Wilkerson podcast, you can find it at worldchallenge.org, and he's currently doing a series on the attributes of God. I highly recommend that you go there and listen to it yourself. I also want to highlight for you Veterans Rant, Rattle, and Roll, with the emphasis on stopping the average of 22 suicides that take place on a daily basis. And the whole aspect of the show is to have veterans come on, rant, rattle, and roll, and talk about their lives and everything that's going on, and of course, to emphasize to others to not take your own life. Again, the Gary Wilkerson podcast and the Veterans Rant, Rattle, and Roll.
You're listening to Rage of the Age. Rage of the Age. Politics, religion, economics, and history with a conservative bend.
Welcome to the essay segment. In this interview, talking with Alain Burrese, it made me think more about the issues of shootings in this country, the different ideas in which have been presented to solve those ideas. And I want to go a little bit more in depth into, some of the extremes that have come out that I think need to be rethought at a minimum in how they're being presented. One of the common approaches that certain proponents would have is to basically ban all weaponry and to remove it from society. And this is presented because of the assumption that if we remove the guns which do the killing, that the killing itself would then cease. I think this is a faulty assumption, and honestly, it just will not work. If we look at the time before guns, there was still violence in streets. There were still murders. There were still mass murders. If you look through history, entire cities were put to death with a sword. Not firing squads, not easy methods, but like one after another. People were just run through with a sword and would take out entire cities in this manner. So it's not the weapon that matters. It's obviously the intention. If one intends to eliminate another and you take away one tool that they can use, they'll find another tool in which to use. You can see this being played out in nations like the United Kingdom, where there are actual movements to ban knives in that country. That's right, knives. Why? Well, they banned the guns. They have curtailed ownership of guns to such a degree that those who want to use other means to inflict bodily harm have done that. Now, the common weapon is knives. But how far can you go down that line before you realize this strategy doesn't work? It's not achieving the goal that you have. If I go and remove the knives, they'll turn to something else. It could be clubs. It could be rocks. It could be anything. Are you going to ban each thing each time? No scissors, no pencils. There's no limit to the creativity in which a human being can exercise if they want to eliminate another. And that's just a sad reality. It's sort of like what Alan was saying in the interview, where you make gun-free zones, but criminals don't listen to the laws in the first place. They somehow have the gun and no one else does. That didn't fix the issue at all. And of course he retorts with well, if we're going to pass laws about it, why don't we make a law that makes murder illegal? That'll stop it. Well, obviously, murder is illegal, yet murders still happen. So here's the truth. Passing a law saying don't do that doesn't make it suddenly disappear from society. I hope that all reasonable human beings can come together and agree on that. Seriously. But then I look at some of the other extremes that are happening, and a lot of it has to do with an idea that's known as posturing. We talked about one of them where, we'll just arm every teacher, and that will help curb the shootings in schools. And to me, that's just as foolish. It's a knee-jerk reaction. And it's really made as an opposition and a in-your-face statement against those who are anti-gun, saying, well, guns are the absolute answer. And really, this has nothing to do with the gun. And both sides, I think, have gone in wrong directions on this because they're fighting over weapons, but they're using school shootings as the leverage to do it or to not do it. And that's the real problem. It's finding something that jerks at people's hearts in order to accomplish a political aim that's hardly even related to it, maybe. And I think both are guilty in this manner. Now, you may be wondering, how can those who are proponents of the Second Amendment rights be going off the hook on this? Well, the idea of arming every teacher arbitrarily is absolutely silly. And again, this has to do with a concept of posturing. The reality is that most people do not have a natural inclination to shoot somebody else down. They don't. Maybe 2 to 3% of the population can naturally pull the trigger and shoot somebody down and not hesitate to do it. Only 2 to 3%. The rest of the population is going to have difficulty with doing it. This has been discovered in studies over the past century or two in the training of our soldiers. And there was a point where we were wondering why our soldiers were not shooting when they had the opportunity and the weapon and the ammunition to do it, but they wouldn't fire. And this was a problem, obviously, for militaries in order to engage your enemies. And they have come to realize that most people do not have the natural capacity to just shoot somebody else. They simply do not. There's a natural abhorrence in the overwhelming number of people to take the life of another human being like that. That's just the way it is. So the military since then has developed different specific types of training in order to condition their soldiers in order to pull that trigger. Not everyone gets that type of training. And then it's not just a matter of pulling the trigger, then it's understanding things like scenarios and tactics and when to shoot, when not to shoot. Now, you're just going to take a weapon and fling it into a hand of a teacher whose hands are full anyway with those kids. Trust me, their hands are full. And now you're going to make them basically a police officer on top of a social worker, on top of a teacher, on top of a psychologist, and everything else we think they're supposed to solve, when first it honestly starts in the home. And now you throw them a gun and say, here, now you're going to keep off the wolves and shoot them down if they come near the kids? Some teachers could, but some can't, and some won't. And that's the reality. Now, if this is the case, why then would some advocate throwing guns at everybody and say, here, that'll fix it? You know why? It's called posturing. Posturing is like an enhanced game of chicken. The classic example of the game of chicken is you have two cars driving at each other, and the goal of the game is not to be the one who blinks, if you will, the one who doesn't swerve away to avoid getting hit. So if you stay on the course and the other guy gets out of the way, you win the game of chicken. Well, that's what posturing's like. Most people on Earth use posturing rather than violence. Most nations use the method of posturing in their diplomacy rather than violence, though the threat of violence is a part of the posturing. See, the idea is this. If we create the impression that everyone in that school is armed, it's meant to be a deterrent, and it's posturing. I'm bowing up. We're daring you. We're playing chicken. Go ahead and come next time. We will gun you down before you get to the door type of attitude. It's meant to be as a threat of deterrence to prevent it the next time. It's like a game of chicken. And this is applied in many other scales. For example, I believe the couple in St. Louis who brought forth their weapons at the mob coming onto their property, they were posturing. They were purposely showing them their weapons as a posturing mechanism to try to deter the crowd. And of course, the crowd was coming in a crowd with their violent speech and threats as a means of posturing to intimidate them. So they came and they postured back. See, posturing works in steps usually. You one-up me, then I have to one-up you. And this continues until one side or the other backs down. That's how posturing works. That's usually how things are mostly resolved. But the thing we have to understand, when we're talking about people who go and shoot up kids in schools, who use wanton destruction to get their means met, who are willing to just shoot people down and not have to, coax themselves into doing it, those people don't respond to posturing. Posturing does not work on that 2 to 3% of the population. Yet it is that percent of the population that is both a benefit and a danger to society who is stuck with posturing. And let me explain that. See, in that group of that 2 to 3% who is able to take a life to achieve their goals, some of those have the attitude not of a criminal, but of a watchdog. Most of them will probably end up being in types of occupations like law enforcement or the military, because that just kind of draws them. They have this makeup where they want to protect someone else, and if necessary, they will use violence to do it, if it's against someone who is also going to employ the violence. So in that 2 to 3%, you could pretty much break them into two different groups itself. You have some who are just, they're going to bypass your posturing to get what they want. Some are going to use it for good and some are going to use it for evil. But see, those who intend to use that approach for evil are not fazed by our posturing. This baffles me on so many levels. And the reason is this. Most people operate in the realm of posturing. It avoids violence, and things are resolved in a nonviolent manner, usually, not always, because of this posturing. Somebody has to eventually back down in the contest. But you have a certain number of people that there is no posturing with them. They will not back down, and they will even bypass your posturing and basically call your bluff. See, posturing is only good until you get to the point where somebody calls your bluff. And if you're not willing to carry out your bluff, that's just what it is. And those who are not affected by the posturing understand that. They're willing to go straight from zero to kill you, and they're not worried about it. But they know you probably are. So throwing arms to everybody and thinking that will deter them is also equally stupid, in my opinion. Now, does that mean I'm against people's rights to bear arms? Not at all. Do I believe in self-defense? I actually do. I absolutely do. But we have to get a better comprehension of how this stuff really works. We're talking about dealing with people who are not going to be put off by our posturing. For example, when terrorists attacked, what did we do? We said, well, we're going to do this, and we're going to fix this, and we're going to increase the security, and we're going to... Did that make the terrorists go, oh, I guess I'll stop being a terrorist? No, of course not. If anything, it made them more determined to strike and to figure out ways to beat the system. All that posturing does is make other people feel better. And really, that's where we err, is we dream up these posturing moves to make people feel better, and then we forget the problem. But guess who did not forget the problem? The one who's ignoring your posturing anyway. Because they're the type of people that have to be met by other people like them. Meaning, I know you're not listening to the laws. I know you're going to find every loophole you can to get away with what you're doing. And I know that you don't care who you hurt to accomplish what you want. That's why you have to have the watchmen. That's why you have to have the police. That's why you have to have the military. That's why you have to have other entities and even private citizens who are armed, that when they see this going on, they know the time for posturing needs to end, and the threat needs to be simply dealt with. But instead, on a public level, usually on the easy politician level, they just resort to posturing. Everybody feels good, and everybody thinks the problem's fixed, and it wasn't. And then it happens again, and we act confused. But there's nothing confusing about it, at least not in my mind, in the minds of some others. A threat has to be treated like a threat and dealt with as a threat. Stop using kid gloves. Stop pretending they're misunderstood or that something else could have been done or could have been, you're posturing. You're making people feel good when they should be worried that there might be an actual threat. And I'm totally beside myself that I'm in a time where there are actually people on the streets calling for defunding of the police while they are burning down cities, attacking people, causing mayhem, instigating fear. All right, this is beyond posturing. These are the type of people who must be dealt with in a similar manner. You bring in the police, what do? They attack the police. You bring in the National Guard. What happens? Some politician is going to restrain what the National Guard is going to do because they're afraid of being embarrassed, and therefore you've only emboldened those gangs. Can I use gangs? Yes, I'm going to. Gangs on the street. Mobilized, organized, and even disciplined, if in a certain manner, gangs. They have their marching orders. They have their strategies. They plan how they're going to conduct this mayhem, realizing that they're going against a side that is thinking in terms of posturing. They've already predicted the posturing, and they have the strategies already in hand to undermine them. Now, is the solution to this give everybody a gun? In part, maybe, but that's just a posturing. You have to go after the actual threat. I guess that's what I'm saying. Until you go after the actual threat, your posturing means nothing. It really does. Until you go to the heart of the matter and deal with it, it's not going to be gone. Your posturing maybe at most will put them in check for a moment. They'll rethink the situation and they're going to come at you again. If we don't understand what we're dealing with, and if we go back lazily to our posturing thinking it will deter further idiots from being idiots, we have totally miscalculated who we're dealing with. I think we need to get minds that are more determined to go after what is actually evil and deal with it, rather than those who want to put on a front in a game of chicken with people who are not going to blink, who are not going to swerve, and you're going to be baffled every time they call your bluff. We have to admit there are evil people with evil intentions, and if you really don't think that, man, you're lost. I don't even know if I can have this conversation with you. There are evil people with evil intentions, and posturing is not going to work with them. The only thing that will work is to totally eliminate them as a threat, either through their loss or by incarceration where they can do no more harm. There's really no other option for those type people. To think otherwise is to jeopardize everyone else around us.
You've been listening to Rage of the Age. If you loved today's podcast, make sure to leave a review on the media you're listening through. Secure future episodes by heading over to rageoftheage.com and clicking the RSS feed button. Until next time, this has been Rage of the Age.